What if everything people think they know about Will Smith's marriage is only a carefully presented version of a much more complicated reality? For years, the public watched what seemed like one of Hollywood's most successful couples, a relationship built on fame, influence, and a family image that appeared strong and unshakable. On the surface, everything looked controlled, almost perfectly curated for the world to admire. But over time, small cracks began to appear. Not all at once, but slowly, through interviews, casual comments, and moments that didn't quite match the image people were used to seeing. At first, these moments felt insignificant, easy to ignore or explain away. But as they started to add up, the narrative began to shift. What once looked like confidence began to feel like tension, and what once seemed like openness started to raise more questions than answers. The deeper people looked, the more they realized that this relationship didn't follow the usual patterns. It wasn't simple, and it definitely wasn't what it seemed at first glance. Now, after years of public attention and viral moments, one question continues to stand out above everything else, growing louder with each new revelation. Why is Will Smith still choosing to stay in a relationship that the world struggles to understand? From the very beginning of their story, there was always one presence that never truly faded, even though that person belonged to the past. Tupac wasn't just a memory or a chapter that had been closed. He remained a constant reference point in conversations, interviews, and reflections shared by Jada over the years. She didn't speak about him casually or briefly. Instead, she described him with a level of admiration and emotional depth that stood out to anyone listening closely. It wasn't just about respect. It felt personal, meaningful, and unfinished in a way that made people pause. As time went on, the frequency and intensity of these mentions created an unusual dynamic. Instead of the past staying behind them, it seemed to exist alongside the present, almost as if it was still influencing how the relationship was being perceived. For many viewers, this created an uncomfortable question. How does a marriage move forward when something from the past continues to hold so much emotional weight? And more importantly, what does it feel like to be in that position, constantly aware of a comparison that can never truly be resolved? As more details about the early stages of their relationship came to light, it became clear that what people saw on the surface may not have reflected how things actually began. While many relationships start with certainty and shared intention, this one seemed to carry a level of hesitation that was openly acknowledged later on. Jada spoke about not wanting marriage at the time, describing it as something she felt pushed into rather than something she fully embraced on her own terms. That single admission added a layer of complexity that people couldn't ignore because it suggested that the foundation of the relationship may not have been as solid as it appeared. When a commitment begins with uncertainty, those feelings don't simply disappear. They often remain beneath the surface, influencing decisions, emotions, and behavior in ways that aren't always visible right away. Looking back, many people now interpret those early doubts as the starting point of everything that followed. What seemed like a strong partnership may have actually been built on unresolved feelings, and over time, those feelings didn't fade. They evolved, becoming more visible and more difficult to ignore as the relationship continued to unfold in the public eye. As the years passed, the conversation around the relationship began to change, shifting from admiration to speculation. Rumors started to appear more frequently, and unlike typical celebrity gossip, they didn't disappear quickly or lose attention. Instead, they seemed to gain momentum, fueled by timing, circumstances, and the lack of clear answers. Jada's professional collaborations with various high-profile individuals became a focal point for these discussions, with people questioning whether those connections were strictly work-related or something more. What made the situation even more intriguing was the way it was addressed publicly. Instead of offering a direct denial or a clear explanation, the couple introduced a concept that only deepened the mystery. They spoke about having freedom within their relationship, a term that sounded progressive and empowering, but also vague enough to be interpreted in multiple ways. For some, it suggested trust and maturity, a modern approach to love that didn't rely on traditional boundaries. For others, it raised concerns about what that freedom actually meant in practice. And because no one could fully define it, the speculation didn't stop. It only grew stronger. The idea of freedom quickly became one of the most debated aspects of their relationship, Not because it was clearly explained, but because it wasn't. On the surface, it sounded like something positive, a sign of trust, independence, and emotional maturity between two people who understood each other deeply. But as more conversations unfolded, the meaning of that word became less clear and more complicated. Without clear boundaries or consistent explanations, people began to interpret it in their own ways, often based on what they were seeing and hearing in interviews and public statements. Some viewed it as a healthy, modern approach to relationships, while others saw it as a sign that something wasn't stable beneath the surface. The lack of clarity created a space where assumptions could grow, and those assumptions quickly turned into widespread opinions. Instead of bringing understanding, the concept of freedom became a source of confusion, leaving people trying to piece together a narrative that never seemed to fully align. And as the discussion continued, it became clear that this wasn't just about a single word. It was about what that word represented in a relationship that didn't follow the rules most people were used to. Everything shifted in a way that couldn't be ignored when a deeply personal moment was shared openly with the world, transforming speculation into something much more real. The term entanglement quickly became part of everyday conversation, but behind that word was a situation that carried far more weight than it initially seemed. What began as a vague explanation slowly unfolded into a clearer acknowledgement of a relationship that existed during a difficult period. What made this moment so powerful wasn't just the information itself, but the way it was revealed. It wasn't hidden or indirect. It was discussed openly, with both individuals present, allowing viewers to witness the interaction in real time. Will's reactions, his expressions, and his attempt to maintain composure added an emotional layer that made the moment even more impactful. It wasn't just about what was being said, it was about how it felt to watch it happen. For many people, this wasn't just another viral clip, it was a turning point that changed how they viewed everything that had come before it. After that moment, the public perception of the relationship shifted completely, and nothing was viewed the same way again. Every interview, every appearance, and every shared detail was now analyzed with a level of attention that hadn't existed before. People began to notice patterns in behavior, differences in tone, and subtle emotional cues that stood out more clearly in this new context. Jada often appeared open and confident when discussing their experiences, sharing personal insights in a way that suggested comfort with vulnerability. In contrast, Will seemed more reserved, sometimes showing signs of emotional weight that viewers couldn't ignore. This contrast became a focal point for discussion as people tried to understand what it revealed about the dynamic between them. The more footage people revisited, the more they felt like they were seeing something deeper than just a complicated relationship. It started to feel like an ongoing story, one that was unfolding in real time, with each new moment adding another layer to something that was already difficult to fully understand. As more details continued to emerge, a pattern began to take shape, and it became increasingly difficult to dismiss it as coincidence. Each new piece of information seemed to challenge something that had been said before, creating a cycle where clarity was always just out of reach. One moment, the relationship was described in one way, and the next, it appeared completely different. This inconsistency made it nearly impossible for anyone to form a clear understanding of what was actually happening. Instead of answers, people were left with more questions, each one leading to another layer of uncertainty. This pattern didn't just keep people curious, it kept them engaged, constantly trying to connect the dots in a story that never seemed to settle into a single narrative. Over time, this ongoing cycle of contradiction and revelation became one of the most defining aspects of how the relationship was perceived by the public. At the center of all the discussion, speculation, and analysis, one question continues to stand out as the most important and the most difficult to answer. Why does Will choose to stay? From an outside perspective, people try to apply logic, searching for reasons that make sense within their own understanding of relationships. Some point to love, others to loyalty, and many to the importance of family and shared history. But none of these explanations fully capture what people are seeing. The situation appears far more complex than a simple decision to stay or leave, and that complexity is what keeps the conversation going. It doesn't fit into a clear narrative where everything can be easily explained or resolved. Instead, it feels layered, influenced by factors that aren't fully visible to the public. And because those factors remain unknown, the question remains unanswered, continuing to draw attention and curiosity from everyone watching. In the end, what makes this story so compelling isn't just what has been revealed, but what remains hidden. The public only sees fragments, moments shared through interviews, clips, and statements that offer glimpses into a much larger reality. But those fragments don't form a complete picture, leaving space for interpretation, speculation, and ongoing discussion. Each new revelation adds another piece, but never enough to fully understand the whole. This uncertainty is what keeps people engaged, watching closely for any new detail that might bring clarity. Yet, clarity never fully arrives. Instead, the story continues to evolve, shaped by what is shared and what is left unsaid. And as long as that balance remains, the same question will continue to echo in the minds of those following the story. Is this truly a choice being made? Or is there something deeper happening beneath the surface that hasn't been revealed yet?